Welcome to the Motor Life F1 podcast. We're back with one of our favorite guests, Moses Kemibaro. Welcome, Moses.
Thank you for having me again. I think this is the third time I've been on your podcast.
Fascinating guy. You're CEO of Dot Savvy, and forever we've known you as a motorsports fan. And we've been looking forward to talking to you about the 2025 season.
Awesome.
Okay. So it started off very well. We're now about to have our third race in Japan, but even without talking about the races and the teams, what's your outlook for the sport this year in terms of technology, regulation changes, end of this era of cars? What do you think about what the season will look like?
So one of the things I'm immediately noticing this season, which is really obviously a good thing, is that it feels like the whole grid has come a lot closer in terms of it's extracting performance as per the current regulations. Before, of course, we switch into 2026's regulations, the cars are basically all very competitive, right? We're seeing teams that you wouldn't expect to be, on the upper end of the midfield, kind of performing really well. And even the top expected ones, whether it's McLaren, currently Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull, you just get a sense that we don't know necessarily who's going to actually win this season. You don't know who it's going to be. And Again, just looking at even the practice times from today in Suzuka, it just feels like the pack is very, very close. And even at the sharp end of the grid, you can't tell who's going to win this thing. Not just the race, but as you think about the season, you don't have the dominance that Red Bull had for the first few years in these new regulations. The pack has bunched up, and ultimately, I'm really excited because I remember a time when I first started watching Formula One, probably in the early 2000s, where you'd go into a season and it wasn't very clear, especially after Ferrari won their last championship at that point with Michael. It wasn't clear who was going to win. You'd have like 5 guys going into the last races, and any one of them could have been a champion. So I think that's where we are right now. We have this opportunity or possibility where we may not know who's actually going to win this championship this year. It could be Ferrari, it could be McLaren. Red Bull could become resurgent, even though their car is struggling. And then some of the dark horses, Mercedes, you have to look at them right now and think maybe they finally got the car right. So it's really one of those topsy-turvy, unpredictable seasons as things look so far.
Yeah, I think in some races you have maybe one McLaren really running off, but you find between position 2 and 6, you have 4 different teams separated by a second or two. So nobody really has pace way above.
Yeah, that massive
else.
gap that we saw with Red Bull in the current regulations when they first came out back in 2022. You just don't see that level of dominance, right? It almost feels like an open field where it's going to be really the driver who's able to extract the maximum performance, and then the team strategy that is able to also ensure that that person can win the most races or have the most podium finishes is ultimately going to be the champion.
Okay. You're in the technology space. Are you surprised how many technology companies are now like team sponsors? McLaren, Red Bull with Oracle, McLaren with Google, Atlassian Williams. And also in my finance space, I'm surprised how many finance companies are there, not just crypto ones, but you have Visa, you have MoneyGram at the Haas team. What's driving all this excitement and interest in the sport where these are really companies who are not traditional motorsport sponsors, but they're really big in the sport now?
Well, I think if you think about, at least in the Kenyan context, you and I were watching Formula One races, probably going back 20 years. I think we remember meeting each other at places as far as 20 years ago. And in Nairobi, and back in those days, you'd find that it was something of an elite sport. You kind of had to have a thing for Formula One, or somebody introduced you to Formula One. Would meet in places like Choices, would meet in places like the Kengeles those days. And the crowd was very much Kenyan, a certain Kenyan type of a crowd. And I'd call them, it felt a bit like the top 1% in a way. If you appreciated Formula One those years, you were kind of not the regular person. Fast forward to where we are right now in 2025, you see that Formula One has a much broader demographic. demographic. And you even see it when you're posting content on, the Twitters and all the kind of engagement you're getting. It doesn't feel like a niche sport anymore.
Yes.
It feels that there's a much bigger following. And many are crediting this to the Drive to Survive Netflix show as one of the activities that opened up the sport to a much wider audience. Then I think over the years, the gravitation or the growth of the sport has also been largely pulled by the likes of Lewis Hamilton, who became essentially a mainstream cultural icon. So that, not just what he did on the grid, but what he does in his own time, kind of galvanized people towards the sport as the only and still the only person of African descent,
Yes,
or black driver, so to speak. And I think that also brought in a lot of people to watch and pay attention to the sport who weren't there before. So when you converge those two dynamics, what that means is that from a sponsorship perspective, they now see that this is a much bigger sport than it used to be, much bigger numbers in audience. It's also gotten a bit of I think with Liberty coming in as the owners of the rights to Formula One, they've brought in a bit of showbiz to it. They brought the sprint races. They have these races in places like Las Vegas and so forth. And you just get a sense that Formula One has become, part sport, part entertainment in that process. So, and I think also if you look at the individuals who are drivers and even the team leads, you think about someone like Gunther Steiner. He kind of gained iconic status when he was at Haas, where, he was as popular as anyone else in the sport. You look at characters like Toto Wolff, you look at Christian Horner. These guys are now bona fide celebrities, above and beyond their day job running a team. So I think just generally the whole, platform that is Formula One has become so much bigger. And it's a hybrid of the sport and now entertainment.
Okay. I mean, you've seen Toto give talks at business schools. You had F1 doing a massive launch for all the teams in London.
Yeah, recently, yeah.
And Hamilton broke the net with his first visit to his Ferrari team, one of the most popular images. What do you see the sport doing to keep this momentum going, to connect with younger fans, female fans, and the next generation of motorsports fans? Drive to Survive introduces them, but what's going to keep them glued in on Sunday afternoons, mornings, or nights to the races?
I think they need to create more fanfare and more accessibility around the sport. That means creating moments where the stakeholders, the fans can somehow be a part of it. Of course, digital platforms give us that possibility. You and I, for instance, and also the groups we're in on motorsports and things like WhatsApp, there's a lot of conversations happening already. And I think what F1 needs to do is kind of like maybe see other ways to make this a bit more democratic in terms of course, venues. We'd love to see a race in Africa. There's rumors that, Kigali could be a strong candidate for this going forward, given that they hosted the awards ceremony, I think it was in December.
December, yes.
And then that was really, for me, shocking because I'd just been in Kigali the week before. I was actually in that same location where they had that thing. And I was like, oh my God, how did I miss this? I could have been in Kigali at the same time. And I was just pinching myself that I was literally there a week before for a conference. And there they were in Kigali launching this thing. So I think we'd love to see an African Formula One race, either in South Africa, maybe Kigali. It seems that possibility is not impossible. There's also a lot of money around Formula One these days, so it's not easy to get a venue. It's not easy to participate, but I think we need to create more democracy around it. And even some of those F1 events that happen outside the main track. So you have, Red Bull going to a city that's not even a Formula One city
and
doing
Johannesburg a few
shooting
months
videos
ago.
and things.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we'd love to see more of that. I'd love to see, I remember many years ago, Shell brought to Kenya, I think, the Ferrari cars. I remember that going to, I think it was at the Carnival, or was it GP karting?
Yes.
Sitting in that old F1 car at the time. And that was exciting, like seeing an F1 car for the first time. But as you know, most of us get on a plane. I've been to one race in person in my life. I went to India, I think back in 2012. Absolutely amazing. I met Kenyan people there. And I think we just need to make it a bit more accessible, a little bit more diverse in the way that it's presented, and also creating more moments where there's fan engagement so that we can taste it and feel it in a bit more personal ways than we are at the moment.
Okay. I think in terms of fan engagement, the sport is regulated by the FIA. And we had the Safari Rally a few weeks ago in Nairobi, where if you watch the broadcasts, you had drivers who were kind of doing a silent boycott, giving interviews in their languages or just refusing interviews. And that's to protest fines
For using the wrong
for using
language.
profanity, and even in F1 it's an issue where drivers are saying, "Don't police us. You put a microphone in my car when I'm talking to my engineers. I'm going to talk to them the way we talk." And do you think the sport is over policing the drivers in the interests of a wider audience? Do you think this is sustainable?
I mean, you've got to imagine. I mean, anytime a human being is in a heightened state of emotion, they tend to do things that may not be within usually their character range. Meaning that if I'm having a frustrating moment at work, I lost a piece of business, chances are my emotional state suggests that I will not follow my usual guardrails. I'll explode based on the feeling I'm in at that moment, and then maybe only realize 5-10 seconds later, maybe I went a little bit too far. And I think it's the same thing in there. These guys are driving at, what is it, 200-300 miles an hour. They are, some of the elite athletes on the planet. They're experiencing 7 Gs, 8 Gs in those cars. I mean, at that stage, how do you tell somebody, please use polite language? Yeah, they're trying to fight for points. They're trying to overtake. They're dealing maybe with mechanical issues in the car. They're in a very heightened state of emotion.
And things are happening which they don't
all
control,
around them,
which disrupt their flow.
Yeah, and that's why you always think, oh, my water is not working. My so-and-so just overtook me badly. I just got clipped here. In that heightened state, I think we've got to allow them to be themselves. Because that's who they are. They're driving, they're in their element, and I don't think it's fair to police them. But of course, they're the broadcasters, right? And they have the ability to police what actually gets broadcast. They can actually muffle all of that. I'm sure AI is able to do that as well. But basically, they should be able to censor anything that sounds a little bit impolite before it goes out on air, But yeah, there you go. I mean, I think it's kind of a little bit too punitive, in my opinion. And to some extent, a bit of cursing and all actually maybe adds a bit of flavor to it,
Yeah.
If you watch, Drive to Survive, all that is said out there is actually broadcast within the Drive to Survive. You hear a lot of swearing, but it kind of brings out a little bit of that authenticity around the situations, the personalities, and obviously the triggers that make people behave that way.
Yeah, I think so. You mentioned Liberty Media as the owners, and they have made a big investment in the USA. You have 3 races in the USA. There'll be a US team next year, maybe 2 years from now.
With Cadillac coming in, and
yes.
Yeah.
And last year, I think they did something which maybe they didn't realize could be an advantage to them, where when Donald Trump came to the Miami Grand Prix, they welcomed him. They gave him his VIP status, and this was in the middle of his. I think he had actually
the campaign period, yeah,
and he had trials going on at the time,
yeah,
and he was kind of a pariah in the world, but they welcomed him, and I think this year, with 3 races in America, how do you think their relationship will change? How can this play to their advantage? And in this era of Trump, and what do you think he'll ask of the sport in terms of making it more American? I know it's odd to ask, but
I think it's a very tricky time, to be honest. And if we look at the current affairs at the moment, the big news is that, Trump dropped the tariffs yesterday. Some of them are just astounded at the amounts. I think Vietnam have as much as 65% on their imports now in the US. But already the auto manufacturers globally are reeling from what is happening right now in the US. And potentially, I don't know whether the motor industry is going to be as welcoming of the president in the upcoming fixtures or races in the US, given that this potential trade war that is now essentially started by him is going to have a knock-on effect on many of the organizations that are in the sport. Remember, a lot of the manufacturers and all represented are from Europe. You got Mercedes, you got Ferrari, you got Renault. All these guys are coming out of Europe, and many of the engine suppliers are from there. So what does this mean in terms of the optics around the US now being seen as the big bully because of the trade war? And yet we have these 3 races, and many of the stakeholders in those teams are about to see some serious pain because of these new tariffs. So I don't know whether the industry as a whole is going to be as welcoming. I mean, he is the president, after all, of the US. But clearly, I think the sentiment may not be as warm as it was in 2024.
Okay. Now, you've seen how he has appeared at races as president. He does a flyover. He drives on the track.
Yeah, he went for the Super Bowl. Yes. He's very good on sports. There's no doubt about it. He knows that sports is a powerful platform to connect with stakeholders. And that's one thing I've always admired about Trump. He has an ability to pick the pulse of the people, and also I think the people who vote for him generally see him as a true one of us kind of a person, meaning that, they gravitate towards him because he just comes across as to some extent, an everyday American person in a way, including his rough edges. So I think that's always been his appeal. He's not as refined or as smooth as, say, a seasoned operator in Washington, but rather he comes across as a regular, reasonably successful person just doing the American thing. So yeah, I think that's interesting. I think by being in those spaces and being very visibly in those spaces, all he's doing is adding value to his visibility. We do live in the attention economy, and he's been able to make sure that he stays relevant to the times by being present. And I think that really works in his favor as a politician and as a president.
As much as there's a lot of American investment in the sport, do you think America needs an American? Okay, it'll have an American team shortly, but do you think they need an American driver? And what do you think? Who are the likely candidates for that? Last year did not work out too well for the Williams team with an American driver, but what do you think cards will play in terms of that for the future? Because
I think it'd be great to have an American driver, but one thing that's very clear about Formula One, and we just saw it the other day with Lawson being dropped from Red Bull and Tsunoda being elevated. We've seen it over time and again when a driver is not able to perform, as was the case with Sargent, who was driving for Williams, then inevitably it's a very binary situation you have there. You're either going to be in a car or not in a car, and it boils down to your performance, right? Especially for the elite teams. Yeah, if you want one of the top teams, they are generally not patient. In fact, I think Williams were very, very gentle and patient with him because he clearly was crashing. He didn't have the pace. It just wasn't working. Sargent was just not right there. They brought in Colapinto, and immediately he was performing at a higher standard. So when I think about the American teams and all, what they're going to need to do is wait and be patient, meaning that there might be some guys coming through the ranks, the GP2s, GP3s, in terms of, F2, F3, and those other levels, even F4, and see maybe there's some American talent coming through. But I think they're going to go for a seasoned, reasonably reliable driver. In fact, there's already speculation that Cadillac are probably going to get Perez to come back in when they come on the grid next year. There's also rumors of some of the drivers who are not currently on the grid, possibly even Ricciardo might be another candidate to come back, but they're going to need steady hands, experienced people, so they can start developing a competitive car. If they're doing that with rookies and they're going the whole, we want an American driver scenario, it only makes things more difficult. So the meritocracy that exists in Formula One does not allow you to be, shall we say, populist in the way that you choose your drivers. We saw what happened to Haas when they went for paid drivers.
Yes.
And these guys just couldn't get this car driving in the right way. Look at Haas today. They've got some good drivers there, and already they're scoring decent points. So my view is that it would be great to have an American driver, but it's going to be based on merit. And it's not going to be based on the optics. They're going to have to get a driver who actually can make this thing work for them.
Now, you've mentioned two drivers, Ricciardo and Perez, and the last Drive to Survive episode, which I've watched. I don't watch them all in a rush.
Yeah.
I take my time.
I've only partially watched the current one. I think I saw 1 or 2 episodes. I'm still going through it slowly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is a perfect way into the current season, because if we look at the performance of teams in the first 2.5 races, and I'll just start kind of at the back. I'll skip Alpine, Renault I'll skip to them. But now the team who is 9th in the championship is Racing Bulls Honda, who are front and center in the news because of the driver change they've made after 2 races, dropping Lawson and promoting. It's more
Tsunoda,
Red Bull did. Red Bull pulled Tsunoda from the team and demoted Lawson there, and they've not done too well. But then they have points from Yuki finishing in the sprint race. And this again ties into the team who is in at the top, Red Bull. So you have Red Bull with running 2 teams and 4 drivers, and still already having to change drivers after just two races. Do you think it was premature? I think I'm a Yuki fan who would say he should have had the seat last year. But what do you think they'll, for the rest of the season, if all stays in place? How will Yuki do? How will Lawson do?
So there's a very interesting theory that's emerging around the cars that both Red Bull and Red Racing Bulls have created this season. And there's a speculation. I read a lot of blogs and a lot of websites and watch a lot of videos around Formula One. And there seems to be a growing opinion that the Racing Bull car is not only just drivable or even possibly more drivable than the Red Bull car, because what you tend to find is the Red Bull is operating a very narrow window specifically to the attributes of the way Max Verstappen drives, which has been the challenge for every driver since he became the number one driver at Red Bull. And the challenge here is this car is perfectly tuned for the characteristics of the way that Max drives, which is usually, they wants a very pointy, sharp end, the way that the car moves. And most other drivers, when they get in there, they're like, it's super sensitive. They can't seem to control the car, which is why you find the Perez and everyone else before him have just struggled to keep up with Max. However, within that narrow operating window, you find that Max is able to extract the performance. Now, coming back to Lawson, you need to think about the fact that in, I think, race one, I think Max was almost winning the race. At the very end of it, there might have been some issues. Equally so, I think in the second race, he got a decent haul of points. And I think in the sprint that Hamilton won, Verstappen was literally right on his heels. So what that's telling you is that this car has the potential to win races, right? Lawson steps in both instances, qualifies last.
Yes.
Right? Now, if I'm a team manager or team principal, I'm looking at that outcome and saying, we are one of the elite teams. We've won 8 championships. What is going on here? You get me?
And last year showed one driver alone.
Yeah, and last year they lost the constructors because Perez wasn't able to bring in the numbers. Comes back to the way the car has been tuned perfectly for this one driver. Now, for me, Lawson has a significant problem there, because how do you have the same machinery as the dude who's almost winning the race and you're coming in last even in qualifying? That means there's a serious problem somewhere. Now, of course, it would appear to be a challenge with getting to grips with the way the car operates. You don't have the confidence in it. I think Hamilton has been talking about this, let's say, with his cars the last few years at Mercedes. He just doesn't feel confident in the car. He can't attack the corners and do the stuff that he normally does the way the car feels. And I think Lawson had that same predicament. He just couldn't seem to get on top of the car to get the maximum performance. And remember, we're talking about milliseconds, in terms of performance differentials, if you're confident versus you're confident. And that can mean either you're up, in the 4th or 5th position, or you're last. So he couldn't just extract that performance. So they had to make a decision early in the season, so that if this is indeed a problem, at least let's throw Yuki into this car. He already had been giving incredible performances last year, the year before, and this year. Guys qualifying all the way up in 5th or something. He had some issues, which meant he hasn't scored some decent points in the races this year. But the point is, the guy is clearly outperforming. And everyone they've put next to him for the last few years, he has been able to outperform them. So it seemed only logical that he should get this opportunity. But remember, Yuki originally came in as a Honda project. Okay? We know that next year, this team is going to be with Ford. And of course, they're going to have the Red Bull power engines business that they've also said, the powertrains, Red Bull powertrains. So my feeling is that they were a bit reluctant because maybe they didn't really see him as part of Red Bull for the future. All right. And I would think that maybe that was the overriding rationale at the time versus performance. That we're moving away from Honda. Yuki's a Honda project. He came to us because of Honda. He's not really going to be here next year, because we have a new thing coming in. Maybe not. But meanwhile, you can't ignore the fact that he was performing. And it takes you back to the fact that Perez got his seat in Red Bull on the back of great performances. It wasn't that Red Bull wanted to hire him, but they could not ignore the fact that he was really performing well.
Yeah.
And they gave him the chance. When Albon and all these guys came and went and they just weren't giving the performance. And let's be honest, he was very instrumental in them winning their constructors in 2022 and 2023, right? So ultimately, my view is that Lawson was clearly not the right fit at this point in time. Maybe there's down the road he can become a Red Bull driver, but given that Red Bull want to win both the drivers and the constructors, take the risk early, pull off this, quite frankly, almost brutal move of moving these 2 drivers across. But I thought by the end of last season that Yuki deserved that seat. Consistent performances. He had his issues earlier in his career, but this guy clearly has something going for him. And if he's able to make this car do something interesting this weekend in Japan, I think it'll only reinforce the fact that he could probably run the entire season with the team.
Honda seemed to have bad timing with the sport, because I think 2018 8.
When they had Alonso and stuff, yes. The McLaren.
When they walked away from the sport, I think after the financial crisis.
Yeah.
And then that team became...
that same vehicle won the championship.
The Brawn team, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And then even in the Red Bull team, when they announced they were kind of walking away from their sponsorship, and that's now when Red Bull and Max won the championship.
And they've won 4 times on a trot. Yeah.
So you now see Honda back on the car as... It's not changed, but at least now they're more in the sport. And do you think if Yuki does well, that Honda might now say, well, maybe this F1 thing... Because now, if you have a Japanese driver in a top team who does well, do you think they might reconsider their decision? I mean, they can supply somebody else with the engines. It doesn't have to be Red Bull, but I think it's a good marketing platform for them.
I mean, let's be honest. If we look at Japanese drivers, we had a very good driver, Kamui Kobayashi.
Yes.
I think at one point he got on the podium, and then that time he was driving for Sauber. Amazing driver. Guy was awesome. We had Takuma Sato back in the day when he was driving for Honda with the BR British Racing. Is that what they're called?
British American Racing.
Yeah, yes. BR. Yeah, yes. So what we know is there's a legacy of incredible Japanese drivers. Yeah, and I think if you look at Yuki, he has the very real opportunity right now as we speak to potentially be the first Japanese winner in Formula One. He has the machinery, he has the experience, he has probably the motivation to make a point. As it is, even when he was at Racing Bulls, he was outperforming Ricciardo and all these guys. He was literally slaying all these guys who are meant to be significantly more experienced and better than him. So I'm really rooting for this guy, this weekend in particular, to make a mark in Japan. If this guy can get on the podium in the race, who knows where he can go? Because again, once you get there, confidence keeps building and building and building. And already in the simulator, from what we've seen, this guy is not complaining that it's impossible to drive this car. And he was only at 10th behind Max in the first practice this morning in Suzuka. So coming back to that, I think if Yuki can sort of set the scene on fire right now in Japan, in his home market, and it comes to light that this guy has the ability to be a front-running driver, winning, maybe getting on the podium, I think that could change Honda's entire view of this thing. They could build a project around him. It's not inconceivable, although Honda is going to Aston Martin next year. Is it inconceivable that they could start building a team around this guy? He's young enough. He could have another 10 years in the sport, but literally build a Honda team, not just being an engine supplier, and actually buy one of the smaller teams and do it. I think it's conceivable. Why not?
Thank you. Now you've mentioned Aston Martin, which is the next team I wanted to speak about. They're 7th in the championship. You have Stroll, who has scored 2 points in both races. Alonso is the only driver who has retired from both races so far this season. And they have invested massively. They have the Adrian Newey project.
The factory, amazing.
What is going to... Do you think Alonso will be around? I think he's showing signs of checking
decline,
out.
Yes. There's no doubt. I think Alonso still has the pace, but I think you have to say that I feel like he's sort of, even the mistakes recently, like very uncharacteristic. I think one way he touched the grass or something and went off, and
even this morning,
and then also there's an engine failure. You have to start asking yourself if there's Alonso himself could be losing the edge. I think it's natural. We all get older, we start losing that, the instincts, the reaction times, and so forth. Even if the mind is willing, the body is not. The guy's still an amazing driver. We saw what he was doing when the Aston got a little bit more competitive a couple of years ago. But interestingly, I think what Alonso has done for Aston Martin is it's kind of helped them guide the team in the right way. He's a two-time champion. He's been in the sport a long time. He's able to bring some of that winning DNA to Aston Martin based on his experience. He was at Ferrari where he did very well, barely lost out on a couple of championships. I mean, he's got that winning quality about him. Meanwhile, I think he's been a good... shall we say, mentor to Stroll. And for all the hate that Stroll gets, I mean, I have been pleasantly surprised with his performances this season. I think he's coming into his own. And I think maybe it has something to do with the fact that your teammate is Alonso, a former champion, a two-time champion, so to speak. And I think we got to watch Stroll a little bit and just see, because he's probably kind of coming towards the end of his career as well in a number of years. But I think this boy inherently has some talent. And we've seen him before. He's been, I think, on the podium before. We've seen him drive amazingly in the wet. I think there's a likelihood that it's still going to be at Aston Martin for a while, but now they have Adrian Newey. They should have a decent engine in Honda, coming with all their success at Red Bull. The regulations are going to do a complete reset next year. Nobody knows what it's going to be like for everyone. But I think we have to assume that if Adrian Newey is not able to deliver a competitive vehicle by 2026, because we're going to assume they have a good engine, they're going to have good aerodynamics, and assuming that all the people that Aston Martin has had from Mercedes and Ferrari and Red Bull, amazing people they have on their team. If they can't produce a reasonably decent car by next year, then I think you have to assume that Alonso will probably not wait another year or two. If he doesn't see that this thing is on it by next year, that's going to be a problem. But then again, you look at the grid and there's so much talent there that they could pick up. There are even guys who are rookies where you just have to look at already their performances in 2 races and say, wow, there is real talent on that grid.
Okay. I have a hunch Aston Martin will make some big news before mid-season. I think in terms of the drivers' market.
Really?
Yeah.
But we know that Stroll Jr. is not going anywhere.
He's not going anywhere, but yes. Okay. So Aston Martin, a team to watch for me this year in terms of Stroll's performance, and then see if Alonso's temperament, and I think he's somebody who makes decisions way early. So we'll see.
Yeah, it could be that he just says, it's not working for me, I'm off. But I think at that point, it'll be very hard for him to get a team, unless maybe, Cadillac, you never know.
Okay.
He could be an interesting steward at the end of his career for a new team like that when they come on.
Okay. The team who is in 5th are a team who were on everybody's cards at the beginning of the season. Our friends in Ferrari. So they have 5th to 17 points. Unfortunate disqualification of both cars in China took away a few points from them. Despite the being caught with the rain timing in Australia and then the disqualification, do you think things are looking well for them?
I think there's something to be said about, if nothing else, the excitement that Lewis Hamilton's move to Ferrari has brought to that team. And also you feel that there's almost like a joy or a happiness that has come there. Number 2, it almost feels like a second wind, that Hamilton has. I mean, winning that sprint for me, you can't imagine how happy I was, But more importantly, I think we saw that Hamilton still has the speed, but he brings so much more to the team in terms of sentiment, in terms of attention, in terms of even, I think, motivating the engineers and the people at the factory to create a championship-winning vehicle. Now, what we can see already is that there are probably 4 teams on the grid who can win this thing. They have the machinery to pull it off. We can see it. We can see Ferrari, we can see Mercedes, we can see Red Bull, and of course, we can see McLaren. For me, those 4 teams are the clear contenders when it comes to the quality of the car. As we heard, this Ferrari apparently is like 90% new from what they had last year. Might look similar, but everything has been redesigned. Number 2, I love the way that Ferrari apparently are building around Hamilton's requirements. Things like the steering wheel, they've done changes. The way the car rides, they're doing changes. But the disqualifications, let me be honest with you, for a team that has won so many championships was genuinely shocking. It felt almost like rookie mistakes, I suppose. But remember, they're talking about something like 0.5 millimeter is how much the skid block underneath his car had been worn down by to be illegal. Then the fuel issue, I think, was less than 1 kilogram. So these are like tiny, tiny mistakes.
Yeah.
But yet they cost them those disqualifications and a good haul of points.
And to get 2 cars disqualified for different reasons.
I'm sure that there was a serious dressing down in the behind the scenes, because Ferrari is too senior and too seasoned to make such rookie mistakes. But clearly, whatever happened is something that I'm sure they'll correct. But besides all of that, I have a very positive feeling. In fact, my biggest concern now would probably be for Leclerc, simply because he, of course, has assumed the team lead role for a while. He's the golden blue-eyed boy. But I think that we're about to see the potential for a fictitious relationship between them, because Hamilton has actually gone out and won a sprint, if not a full race. Number 2, he's outperforming Leclerc. As it's in the P2 that I saw today in Suzuka, I think Hamilton was 4th on the grid, ahead of Leclerc, I think 2 positions. We are genuinely seeing a Hamilton that we've not seen in a while in terms of the stuff that he's able to do in a car when he gets the machinery. So Ferrari have a decent car. They need to get on top of their quality issues. They need to get on top of some of the historically bad team calls, calling the cars in too early, too late. That seems to be a perennial problem. But by and large, I think they have the equipment to do something spectacular. Now, of course, coming on the back of losing Sainz, rather deciding to replace him with Hamilton, one would have thought that maybe it was a bad call. But now I feel that this decision was purely and is well vindicated that Hamilton was the right call. He brings brand value. Apparently Ferrari's share price has gone up. They're selling more merchandise than ever before. So that star power, as well as that incredible talent that is Hamilton, is now sitting in a red car.
Okay. Now, Hamilton's former team, Mercedes, is not doing too shabbily. They are ahead of Ferrari. Russell is scoring podiums consistently, quietly. He's not shown on many races, but you just see him on the podium.
No, he's just grabbing those points.
Antonelli seems to be the most surprising rookie so far in terms of the new young drivers, where he doesn't appear much on TV, but then he just shows up fifth and fourth. I think one of the two races he came from poor qualification, but in the wet he was able to acquit himself. So do you think Mercedes management is happy with their star power for the future?
They're over the moon. Okay. I think they couldn't have hoped for a better outcome. I mean, losing somebody with the experience and the success of Hamilton was a big blow for them. This was the guy. This guy would pull things out of the bag. He would make things happen. Obviously, since 2021, I don't know whether that was an ominous sign when, he lost that last race, Abu Dhabi to Max Verstappen under controversial terms. I don't know whether that was a bad omen.
That's a trauma point for everybody.
Yeah. But I don't know whether that was a bad omen. But from that point onwards, it just feels like this team has not been the same team. Last year, I remember when Hamilton won at Silverstone, I was practically in tears. I couldn't believe it finally happened because we didn't know that it was going to happen. And of course, he got the promotion in Hungary, so he got 2 races. Yes. So we started seeing signs that this guy was actually still there. But more importantly, I think if you look at where Toto Wolff is, he's got this young rookie. He's got a reasonably young driver in Russell, who has been for many, many years considered to be one of the best guys on the grid. I just get a sense that although Mercedes don't have that Hamilton affiliation, which has been so endemic to their success, they now have this young guy who seems to be exhibiting signs of what I'd call a young Verstappen. That was what they were saying even before he got to Mercedes and became a full-time driver. They were saying, this kid, we think, has the potential of Verstappen. And clearly, within 2 races, we are seeing it. Okay. He's outperforming. He's ruthless on the track. He's overtaking much more senior and experienced drivers. He's not putting a wrong foot anywhere, seemingly, for a guy who's only driven in 2 races and 1 sprint. And I think you have to look at Kimi and say, if you're looking towards the future, if you're looking towards the resurgence and the future potential of Mercedes, all they got to do is what they're doing right now. If they can keep picking up the points, Antonelli can be there, to pick up the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th place. I think Antonelli is a potential candidate for a win this year already. This guy sounds like his prodigious talent to the level of potentially even the Verstappens and Lewis Hamilton. So Mercedes, I'm happy. Number 2, they seem to have gotten on top of this car. The guy is qualifying amazingly well, at least Russell. Kimi Antonelli is also seemingly on top of it. I think these guys are the dark horse here. We could very well see a drivers and a constructors championship moving towards Mercedes just on consistency. If they can just keep doing what they're doing, keep doing it really well, get those 2s and 3s and 4s, those numbers add up.
Okay. Thanks. We've talked about Red Bull and Racing Bulls. We'll skip them. We'll come to the current leading contender, the current constructors champion, McLaren. Could have had 2 1-2s in both races, but Piastri had a very energetic recovery in Australia. They seem to be, even in the close pack, we've mentioned about 4 teams being very close to each other. McLaren are clearly ahead of the other 3. Do you think there'll be team acrimony? Where do you see this team going? Is this a 2007 McLaren team where they'll start infighting, or Mercedes?
So let's go back to history, right? If you look at McLaren, Lando, when McLaren was no longer the McLaren we're seeing back today, the old McLaren, the McLaren of Kimi Räikkönen, the McLaren of Alonso and
Mika
Hamilton,
Häkkinen, yes.
and everyone else who came before. McLaren is an incredibly successful Formula One team. But let's be honest, for a better part of a decade, they just haven't been a team to really pay attention to. There were times that Norris was getting overtures from other teams, and he just said, look, I'm happy here, I'm sticking it out. And I think that loyalty has been fully repaid by Norris. He's clearly the number one driver. His performances last season were amazing. His racecraft, I think, honestly speaking, some of those instances he had with Verstappen last year are a little bit dicey. I don't know whether he has what I call the championship mentality, meaning that what I've seen over the years is that an F1 champion is almost somebody who's uncompromising to the point that they don't mind fighting their own teammate to win. We saw Vettel do that. We've seen Hamilton do that with Nico. There's just almost an edge or a streak, a mean streak, as it were, that is there. I am starting to wonder whether Norris, even with his incredible pace, has that edge.
Yes.
And it's almost like a personality trait. It's almost like a ruthlessness that you seem to find consistently in the champions. Michael, all of them. There's something about them that is ruthless. I don't know what you call it. Maybe it's grit or something. Now, when I look at what's happening in McLaren, Norris clearly last year was a serious contender next to Verstappen. He could have won it, potentially, if he had not made some mistakes along the way. But going forward, you got to remember who's mentoring Piastri.
Yeah.
Weber.
Weber, who suffered.
Under Vettel, who even got overtaken at times when the team had told Vettel to not overtake.
Stay put, yeah.
Weber has a first-hand seat to knowing what it's like to lose a championship on very, very small margins. So imagine that guy who's bitter, who's now essentially vicariously living through Piastri, the dream that he never achieved for himself. I would have said at the beginning of the season that Piastri is going to play second fiddle and let Norris win. The last race and what I'm seeing at the moment, including today where this second practice we saw Piastri was ahead, my sense is that we are going to see potentially a very bruising internal team battle for a potential champion in that team. And my feeling, believe it or not, is that Piastri seems to have that mean streak, in my opinion. There's something about his attitude, even the way he joined the team almost acrimoniously, the way he was meant to go to Alpine.
Last minute.
And then whatever. This guy
not really signed me.
And then that thing that trended online, I have not committed to whatever. This guy is all about winning, right? And Piastri hadn't quite gotten on top of the car in the way that Norris had been, because of course Norris had been a McLaren for many years. But you now start to get the sense that maybe Piastri might have the edge on Norris. He wasn't quite there. I think he's there now. So if Norris starts showing, if Piastri starts showing consistent momentum and starts winning more races, remember he's won 3 races now. There's every possibility that, assuming that these guys have the best car and they're driving well and team strategy works on race day, etc., I think you have to watch Piastri possibly more than Norris. I think he's the underdog. I think it's that no one is really thinking is going to go for it. But I feel like Piastri just has that less of the good guy thing and almost that mean streak that could be a champion.
Okay. I think Norris has an edge in poles, which usually gives him the advantage with the team on race day. But I think Piastri,
because he can run away,
Yes. Okay. So thank you so much. If we come to today, this weekend is the Japanese Grand Prix. Let's ignore what happened in P2 today, because it's been quite a chaotic morning, afternoon.
Yeah.
Yuki and Red Bull in Japan, McLaren's dominated the beginning of the season. What's your prediction for the podiums in Japan on Sunday?
Ooh, that's a tricky one. I mean, you have to count in the McLarens for sure. One of them at least is going to be up there. I have no doubt about that. I noticed something in P2 that Hamilton, I think, was in the 4th position. I know it was a chaotic session, and I didn't watch it all in its entirety, but he was on hard tires.
Yeah.
And he was something like 4/10 away from the person who was fastest in Piastri. So I'm thinking when they bolt on those softs, I also heard something that they had discovered something in the simulator this week, the Ferrari team. So whatever they discovered apparently in the simulator, they now understand how to unlock the performance. I think you have to count at least one of the Ferraris on the podium. And maybe third, possibly George Russell, I would say, is somebody you got to watch. I get the feeling that Red Bull is not going to make it there. I don't know why. Maybe through the chaos and rising up the ranks during the race, possibly. But I'm feeling like at least one Ferrari, one McLaren, and possibly a Mercedes.
Okay. That'll be an interesting podium to see on Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
Okay. As always, thank you very much, Moses Kemibaro. I know you have a day job as a founder and CEO, but for the rest of the time, you have a fascinating podcast, pure digital passion. You have very interesting guests, and in the tech world, the finance world, product development, marketing. It's a wonderful podcast. Please listen to him. He's a wonderful speaker at your companies. Look for this guy. And let's talk more F1 in the next coming weeks. Thank you so much. You find him online as Moses Kemibaro on Twitter, Instagram, virtually every platform. And enjoy your race on Sunday. I think I'll join the paddock group this weekend. I'll see. I think they're on someone in Hurlingham.
Okay.
Yes. So cool guys to hang out with. So thank you so much and have a nice week.